Yo, what's up? I'm Zarkane. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I decided to revisit a topic I had planned to cover right at the start of my Genestealer cult series, and honestly, reading back over my notes at the time, I'm kind of glad that I never did it back then because a lot of my opinions have changed recently, and to be fair, I was probably a little bit too overzealous with my insistence that, Twisted Helix was the best and only choice. That's still my favourite, but my eyes have been open to other ideas. So today we're going to go through them one by one, and also I know the community loves a good old tier list, so I'm going to cook one of those up too. I'm also going to make a little statement here. I know I can be a bit blunt with my opinions and how I say don't do this or this idea is wrong and stuff like that, but let me just make it perfectly clear that I completely acknowledge I'm not the law on this subject. They're just my points of view that I've put together from actual combat experience in 40k. That's the one thing I can promise you, that I've played a lot of games in the last 2 years, like hundreds of them, come up against all kinds of armies and opponents of varying skill levels. Let me tell you now that no matter how you run your army, what it comes down to at the end of the day is your ability to play the game itself and understanding how to make the most of what you've got. And like, the odds are always stacked against Genestealer cult, but I find that it also gives us that challenge of learning this game the hard way and becoming much tougher opponents for it. Now, before we get cracking on the main subject, I was going to spread a bit of hype. Everyone knows how badly Genestealer cult needs a new codex. And there's been these rumours floating around online about the December release being a Custodes and Genestealer cult double whammy. And so the other day I was told by a contact I have at Games Workshop HQ that this is indeed the case. So I'm going to do my best not to get carried away, but let's just say I can't fucking wait for Christmas now, because Santa is certainly bringing me what I asked for. No, prayed for. There was rumblings about a Tyrannid and Astra Militarum double release too, which actually made more sense to me considering the new Synapse rules that came up the other day, Synapse, and there's been the new guard stuff like the Krieg Infantry and the Kill Team box and Gaunt's Ghosts. But, even if that is what happens, I'll still be really happy because I've got a Tyrannid army, I've got 2 Imperial Guard armies, and both of them can be merged into our cult list anyway, so either way, that's loads of great new opportunities for us. But anyway, let's get back to today's topic, the cult creeds. Now, if you're new to the faction, choosing the right creed is tricky enough because there's not a great deal of good advice out there. It's even more tricky if you're new to 40k as a whole because you're not going to understand the relevance of the creed specialities when you read through them and picture how they're going to play out in game. So get this, because we are such a weak faction at the moment, and when I say weak, I mean statistically, I think we're actually at the very bottom of the list on all tournament scenes, but being so weak, it's really important that you pick the right creed that is going to match up with the units you bring and the tactics you want to use them in conjunction with, because, Space Marines, we are not. There are factions out there, like Marines as an obvious example, that can be thrown down on the table by any rookie and be expected to perform decently enough regardless. That is not us. Before we look at the rules attached to each, let's bring up the 6 different cults now and briefly explore the lore and ideology behind them, because that does actually help you picture in your head how it's going to work. So first up, we've got the poster boys for GSC, which are the cult of the Fourarmed Emperor. They're the first cult to be documented, originally encountered by Deathwatch Kill Team Cassius, I believe, and they've since spread across half the galaxy to become the largest and most prolific of all the Genestealer cults. Their approach to warfare is deeply rooted in the mining colony background, using tunnels and underground layers to assault and ambush the enemy from below. So if you're looking at GSC models on the Games Workshop web store or elsewhere online, you're probably going to see them painted in this classic scheme. Next up, the Hive cult. If any creed was to benefit from the use of Brood Brother units, then this one should have been it. Hive cult is comprised primarily of converted military regiments, and is therefore it's well stocked up on stolen Lehman Russers and lasguns aplenty. And they also take in a lot of Hive gangers, resulting in a well-organized fighting force. So if you wanted to make your army look like something that's like a rebel Astra Militarum garrison, then these are the way to do it. Now, here's a popular one, the Bladed Cog. They trace their beginnings to planets run by the Mechanicus. I won't lie, I think this is definitely one of the coolest concepts in the lore, as the members of this cult are as much hybrids of human and Genestealer as they are human and machine. They borrow heavily from the Adeptus Mechanicus, resulting in cyborgized or augmented warriors. So if you can picture Robocop having a Genestealer's face under his mask, then you're probably on the right track. Next, the Rusted Claw. These guys are your wasteland nomad type. So if you want to envision the Mad Max Desert Outriders sort of theme for your fighting force, then these are the ones for you. They're most famed for their Atalan Jackals, the Dirtbite Riders, and whilst I'm not a fan of them in game, they just look so fucking good, and the imagery that pops into your head is just so iconic. Now, the Pauper Princes. According to the lore, they come from a world which is deprived and harsh, resulting in like this overly zealous and obsessive following of their cult leaders who offer the only prospect for salvation. So they might be lacking in weapons and hardware, but they make up for that in their numbers and their sheer sacrifice. And last by no means least is my favourite, the Twisted Helix. If you like the idea of a more bizarre, freakish looking army comprised of bioengineered mutants, then you'll be right at home here. The creed is centered around the aberrants and the biophagus, well, I'll fucking learn how to say that one day. Biophagus, whatever. You know, they're like the mad scientists who create these mutants and stuff. And you see that staff grabbing tool thing that he carries? That's for lynching cult members and injecting weird potions and crap into their necks, which is a bit grim, but seriously funky if you ask me. Now, whilst I don't usually go into the lore, it really is important to understand what each of them are supposed to be good at, because to be fair, Games Workshop did reflect most of these quite nicely with the rules and the abilities they get. It's just a sad case that they're very outdated now, and when you look at the plethora of insane shit that new codexes get, it's like, wow, times really do change, don't they? Now, remember that each cult gets access to not just its creed, but its own unique stratagem, its own relic, warlord trait, and psychic power. Now, a lot of these are absolute toss, but there's some sick stuff here, so I'm going to go through the absolute lot of it. As usual, if you disagree, you know where the comment section is, so tell me I'm wrong, please. I might act like it, but I know that my word is not gospel on the topic of Genestealer cults. You know, change my mind. So I'm going to tackle each cult in order of how decent I think it is. People seem to love a good old tier list or, you know, like a ranking table, so here's how I see it. Number 1 at the top, Twisted Helix. For me, I'm going to, you know, obviously I'm going to say that. I may as well get it tattooed on my forehead at this point. Number 2, Pauper Princes. Number 3, Bladed Cog. Number 4, Cult of the Fourarmed Emperor. Number 5, Rusted Claw. Number 6, Hive Cult. And at the very bottom, number 7, the Custom Creeds. You know, it's important not to forget that the Custom Creeds exist here because actually, no. Scrap that. Go ahead and forget that we have Custom Creeds because they're a literal big pile of wank. I remember the day the Greater Good book arrived. I think it was in like March 2020. And I eagerly, you know, awaited all the cool stuff we were going to get. You can just picture the disappointment when I read through it. You know, we got like 2 or 3 pages at the back and seeing the absolute poo load that the Custom Creeds were. That book just sucked so bad for us. Since I'm not going to cover them properly, let me just get them out of the way now. There is one custom trait combo that has some value, at least in theory, which is the Workers Arisen and Seasoned Enforcers one. This gives you the ability to reroll all hits with infantry mining lasers, seismic cannons, and heavy stubbers. Now, people took note online that apparently some guy won a tournament fairly recently with a list that used this trait combo, but yet when I checked it out, he didn't even have any mining lasers in his list, but he did have lots of heavy mining lasers on Ridge Runners and stuff. So I made the guess here that he completely screwed it up on the rules, maybe not on purpose, probably by accident, and illegally used this trait on his vehicle-mounted lasers. So just to be clear, this is for your neophytes holding mining lasers only. Ridge Runners and other vehicles can't even benefit from our cult creeds anyway, so it would have been like, you know, a double illegal thing. But anyway, since you picked 2 from the list, you could pair it up with Seasoned Enforcers, which gives infantry the ability to move and fire heavy weapons without penalty, which is the bladed cog part, and then just completely max out as many 10-man squads as possible. You could chuck them in Goliath trucks, maybe backed up by a Jackal Alphas. I think 12 squads would cost you about 960 points. That's the equivalent of 24 mobile las cannons re-rolling all hits. It's one of those things that could work in theory. Who knows, maybe I'll try it out sometime. And whilst I'm on that point, I'll just make double sure everyone knows and is on the same page. Please remember that cult creeds apply only to your infantry and your bikers. It's a really shitty rule that affects our faction. That's just the way it is until they change it, so don't fuck it up. Ridge Runners, Trucks, Brood Brothers, Lehman Rusters and Sentinels, even the Pure Strain Genestealers and the Patriarch himself, none of them get to use the creed. Alright? Now, we've got that part out of the way. Let's get into the deep dive, starting with the most competitive of all 6, in my eyes. Twisted Helix. I did a video focus on this creed about 6 months ago, so I won't rehash it too much. But I'm guessing some of you haven't watched that video, so let's just make sure we cover all bases. The Twisted Helix is your go-to for aggressive, melee-orientated fighting. I've said this a million times, if you look at our codex and the weapons available to us, almost all of the good gear is in the melee category, so it makes sense to be leaning into it. The creed itself gives you +1 strength and +2 to advance rolls. This pops most of your combat troops up to strength 5, which is critical for wounding tough enemies in today's meta. And it means that even your basic neophytes will be stronger than they look at a glance. However, the buff to advance rolls makes us really fast, especially considering we have a stratagem and a psychic power that gives us the ability to advance and charge. This shit is essential for surprise rush tactics. You can quite easily keep a squad of acolytes with mining tools hidden behind some ruins and then spring them forwards up to 15 inches plus a buff charge if the Clamavus is nearby. Your opponents won't see that shit coming. Twisted Helix also get top dollar picks of stratagems, powers, relics, and warlord traits. All of them kick ass. So for the Patriarch, I'd always recommend Bio Alchemist. This trait can make his claws max out at flat 4 damage. That hurts. The relic is the elixir of the prime specimen, which buffs your wounds, attacks, and toughness by 1 each. It's not my first pick over the amulet of the Void Rim, but still absolutely great for turning him into a real combat monster. You could also throw it on an Abominant. He really struggles with only 3 attacks, so it's a nice way to remedy that. For powers, we get access to Mutagenic Deviation. I almost always pick this as it's so good against threatening infantry blobs. You can cast it against an enemy squad and then your whole army gets +1 to wound when fighting them in melee. So obviously, the bigger the target, the better. Mixed with the +1 strength, it almost guarantees you'll be wounding anyone on a 2+. Don't forget, this also combos with Rending Claws. It means that any rolls of 5s become 6s, so that's a lot of -4 AP. Now, not many people bring aberrants anymore in a competitive way. Maybe that'll change soon. But their unique stratagem, Monstrous Biohorrors, is not to be trifled with. It's a 3 CP fight again affair, which means that if you get stuck in combat and fail to kill something tough, you get the chance to duke it out all over again. Now, aberrants, I'd say, are almost certainly going to get buffed in our new codex, so I would start thinking about them now as a unit that will make a big return. I don't think they'll necessarily get point reductions. I would just put money on them getting more attacks, more durability, something like that to make them worth that high cost. They are so, they're such a big unit for us that everyone loves to see, but no one wants to bring anymore. Let's move on. Now, in the past, I probably have said that Bladed Cog were my second pick. Not anymore. I've opened my ears a bit to people's advice online, and I'm now going to put Pauper Princes in the number 2 slot. This is kind of funny, because originally, back when I did these videos, they were going to be my last pick. I really hadn't given them the time of day, and I'll put my hands up, I was definitely wrong. So their creed basically allows them to re-roll all failed hits when on the charge, are being charged, or if they intervene somehow. This is actually very, very good because, sure, it only applies in the first round of fighting, but you almost always die after the first round of fighting anyway if you don't completely smash the enemy. So I won't lose any sleep over that. The first thing that should pop into your head is Rock Cutters. These anti-Terminator mining tools hit at -1 normally, so without a Primus around, they'll be hitting on 4s. That's a big problem, but with Pauper Princes, you're going to really see that hit ratio hike up. Sure, a reroll can fail twice, but it ain't half bad. In a way, it means that you can do away with the Primus altogether, since you won't really be needing his buffing aura anymore. It's a great way to save on 85 points in a HQ slot. Speaking of which, you won't be needing cool icons anymore either on your Acolytes or Metamorph squad. That could save you another 60 points across all those squads. And don't forget that Aberrants can't get reroll 1s from a cool icon, so it's great for them on the attack. I mean, they're already strength 5 anyway, so they don't necessarily need the Twisted Helix bit. So let's take a step back and consider this part. The reason why I'll always take Twisted Helix is because A, my Acolytes already reroll their own 1s, and B, I can get all of them hitting on 2s using the Primus anyway, apart from with the Cutters. So in my eyes, it takes a bit more clever positioning to make sure those buffs apply, but assuming you do, you can be stronger, faster, and having crazy high hit ratios regardless when you stick with Twisted Helix. So it's food for thought and totally depends on your personal taste. If you have to, spread squads out, it is indeed harder to get those same buffs all at the same place. Consider Alien Majesty on a Broodcoven Primus to help out with that, that extends his aura range. Anyway, there's some other cool stuff here. First up is the Warlord Trait, Beloved Grandsire. Now, I've never actually had a chance to try this out in game yet, but having a 2+ unquestioning loyalty roll on your Patriarch would be so good. I mean, As long as you've got at least like 20 neophytes around him, you could practically throw him into any situation like a total nutter and be almost entirely confident that he'll be able to save all attacks with those rolls. I mean, or almost all. As soon as your opponent realizes, they've got to chew through all the infantry first to get to him, they're wasting all their firepower on chaff. So it's a win-win in a way. Well, obviously not for the neophytes because they get their faces blown off. But that brings us to the relic and psychic power, which are basically identical. It's kind of weird. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think you can double them up, which is where it becomes interesting. So the relic's called the Reliquary of Saint Tendark, and it allows all models within 6 inches of the bearer to shoot when they are killed, assuming you roll a 4+ first. So basically it's exactly the same as the new Death Corps trait. And then if you cast the power, Last Gasp, on a squad, it allows the same thing. So if you do that, each individual will get 2 chances to roll a 4+ on death, to then shoot, or if they're in combat, get a single melee attack. So whilst your opponent is chewing through all these bodyguards, your Patriarch is then also granting them 1 or 2 chances to then immediately shoot back, which is pretty mad. I mean, granted, if it's neophytes, it's mainly just going to be auto guns or shotguns. But when we start getting to hand flamers on your acolytes, that could really hurt. Not to mention any mining tools like rock saws, stuff in close combat. So yeah, more food for thought. Last of all, they have a stratagem called Vengeance for the Martyred, which allows you to get a +1 to hit against an enemy unit that killed one of your characters. I think this is a bit weak, to be honest. Too situational, and you'll already be re-rolling any failed hits in the fight phase. So sure, it applies to shooting too, so it could be used on ridge runners or your trucks. They're not excluded here, but if you bring loads of them, you'll be probably rocking a Jackal Alphas to get that +1 anyway. So moving on, not so swiftly, let's do Bladed Cognex, the favoured creed of every Genestealer cult newbie. No offence, but it's true. I give them a hard time, but to be fair, they've still got some absolutely great stuff, so don't let me put you off too much. The main reason people immediately choose Bladed Cog is because it gives you lads the 6+ invuln save. It's one of those things that screams, pick me, but I'd advise you to go and watch the video I did all about Bladed Cog a few months ago, because in my eyes, it's a bad call. I mean, alright, it's not bad, it's just a bit of a trick. It lures you into thinking that your guys are going to start becoming somewhat durable, which they won't. The sort of weapons that get fired at your infantry will just wreck them anyway. Basic bolt guns and las guns, even fucking pistols. They just clear out acolytes like nobody's business. You won't even get to feel the benefit of that invuln save unless you're being hit by -2 AP weapons. So, sure, there's plenty of that around, but your opponent won't need that kind of thing to clean house. The units we really would need it on is the Goliath trucks or the Ridge Runners. I mean, they get hit by Melter and Plasma all the fucking time and it just wrecks them. You don't get a save. If they had a 6+ invuln, it would make this creed so good. Now, the rule does have some other more useful parts. So first of all, it increases the invuln save on any models that already had one to start with. So that refers to your Kelemorph and your Locust. A 4+ invuln on either of those 2 small characters is still not great. They get killed by small arms just as easy as before. Toughness 3 really lets them down, so don't expect them to suddenly become hard bastards. Remember, it doesn't help your Patriarch get a higher invuln save. Now, the one decent combo crops up when you equip an Abominant with the Bladed Cog Relic, which is Mark of the Clawed Omnissiah. It gives the bearer a 4+ invuln, which then with the creed on top bumps it up to a 3+, and that makes him seriously hard as nails. Remember that he's toughness 5, toughness 6 if you're injecting with the Biofocus Goad. He regenerates D3 wounds, flattens damage by 1, has a Feel No Pain of 5+, which you can also reroll 1s on, and you can also buff that to a 4+. You can use Neophytes as body shields for him. I've had a lot of success running a similar Abominant in Crusade games, and his ability to soak up damage is so fucking cool. So try it, even just for fun. And remember, don't give this relic to the Patriarch. He can get similar saves, but with more bonuses on top using the Amulet of the Void Room. Now, the Bladed Cog Warlord trait is very similar to the Primus's inbuilt ability, which is Meticulous Planner. That's the one where it gives you reroll 1s to wound against a single target. Now, this cult-specific one is called Single-Minded Obsession, and it's exactly the same in function, but it just gives full rerolls to wound instead. Very useful for those big chunky targets you're going to have to take out, but still, I find these tricky to execute. A lot of the time, your Warlord or the Primus have to put themselves dangerously close to whatever it is you're attacking, just so the assault troops can benefit from the aura. Sure, it applies to shooting too, but apart from mining lasers, then there's not much heavy firepower in our arsenal anyway. So one thing I will say is that it can be tasty when you pair up with hand flamers. full rerolls to wound gets you almost double the result in many cases. So think of it this way, you can use it against big horde blobs instead of the obvious heavily armored targets and really get some nasty damage. Remember that big horde infantry blobs are the things which, they're going to be stopping you from scoring points. So just focus on them instead a lot of the time. Now, before I forget, this cult creed does let your infantry carry mining lasers and stubbers and stuff without the movement penalty. I won't lie, that part is nice, as hitting on 5s is horrendous otherwise. This also applies to your guys, when they're packed into a Goliath truck, so the mobile battle bunker theory works nicely. They can be affected by auras from outside the truck too. So for example, the Jackal Alphas can buff hits not just for the truck's guns, but for the lads inside too. Now the last thing to discuss is the cult psychic power. This is a bit of an awkward one, Undying Vigor. It's a classic 5+ feel no pain cast, which sounds great, and Tyranids get exactly the same thing called Catalyst, and they make great use of it. But for us, I'm not so sure. You see, consider the fact that we already do have quite a lot of options for Feel No Pains. Our Aberrants, prime example, already come with it built in. We can give auras of 6-up by using the Icon Ward. Our vehicles already get their own 6-ups from Rugged Construction and the Flare Launcher. 5-up is obviously better, and it could make your Acolytes slightly more annoying to shift, but as I've said before, they still die stupidly easy. What you'd be doing by casting this on them is just delaying the inevitable. I've made this statement so many times before, and I'll do it again. If your Acolytes ever get shot or hit first before they get to charge, then you flopped it. That's what playing GSC is all about. Keeping them out of harm's way throughout the game until it's time to make that assault. One thing you could do is use this on pure strain Genestealers, which I know are overcosted, but they do have a 5-up invuln, so this could potentially make them stick around in combat if you're bringing a big lump of 20. Oh, and wait, I nearly forgot, the Stratagem, Overthrow the Oppressors. This is actually, it could be very good considering the current meta. Everyone knows that AdMech are the bogeyman right now. This gives you the ability to get exploding 4s to hit in combat against them specifically. And that's mad. It's not an automatic second hit, just another hit roll to make, but that's still crazy. Sadly, you can't buff this with a Primus to make it 3+, but fucking hell, imagine hitting with 50 Metamorph attacks with maybe half of them generating more. Or perhaps with the Aberrants, and you could double up on this with the Abominance Aura that generates extra automatic hits on 6s too. Those big Skitari hordes sure won't like that. Now, for the record, the Stratagem still applies on 5 to every other Imperium army, and 6+ just for, any other Xenos or Chaos or whatever in the game. Imperium covers at least like 50% of the enemies you'll face, so, that's happy days. Bladed Cog do have a lot of cool stuff, I'm not going to lie. Just don't take them expecting your army to suddenly become durable. That's not what it's for. Look at other abilities, not just the invulns. That's a beginner mistake. Now, the next few creeds I consider to be average at best, bordering on crap. So let's start with the one that should be on top of the game, at least if the lore is to be believed, and that's Cult of the Fourarmed Emperor. I popped them at number 4 on my tier list, and there's a few decent aspects to this cult, but it's just not good enough to make them a worthwhile pick. Let's go to the start and check out the creed. It splits into 2 parts depending on what battle round it is. So in the first battle round, simply add 1 to advance rolls and add 1 to charge rolls. So you can see here they at least do want you to be considering going for some kind of first turn charge. But then going into the second battle round, and also goes for the 3rd, 4th and 5th as well, you add 1 for advance and charge rolls, but specifically only for units that come in from Deep Strike or Strategic Reserves. So after the first turn, this creed is entirely useless apart from those ones that come in from Deep Strike. It doesn't take a genius to realise that that's shit. What it boils down to really is just having units that get +1 to charge out of Deep Strike. I mean, whoopie fucking do. I already said a million times that relying on Deep Strike is an outdated concept. It's a relic of 8th edition. Cult of the Fourarmed Emperor is in itself a relic of 8th. I mean, read the rule. +1 to advance rolls for units set up on the board in turn 2. How the fuck does that work? You can't move or advance if you come in from Deep Strike, so it literally makes no sense. If your game plan is relying on melee units to come out of Deep Strike and make charges, you will have a bad time. It's hard enough trying to find space to Deep Strike on the new smaller boards. You will fail those charges just down to bad luck on the dice more often than not, even with rerolls, even with +1 or even +2 if you have a Clamorous around. Your tactics need to evolve to start these guys on the board, behind cover or in trucks so they can actually move instead of just dumping them and hoping them for the best. I mean, and you know what? Twisted Helix already gets +2 to advance rolls. They're already getting the ability to cover the same amount of ground in every battle round, in every situation, on top of being more powerful in combat once they get there. Acclamavus is a solid character choice. I highly recommend him. His ability gives you everything this creed can do and more for the small price of 60 points. However, don't write this cult off just yet. There's one very special stratagem that still has huge potential, and that is a plan generations in the making. This is a big one. It's one of the 3 CP ones. So it used to be fine back in the days of 8th where you could be starting with 20 or more CP to blow on silly stuff throughout the game. Basically, it gives you the ability to totally deny an opponent's stratagem. When they announce they're going to use one, you drop this bad boy and just be like, nope. It can totally flip the outcome of some key swingy moments, stuff that they rely on to make their tactics work. If they know that you've got access to this, it also plays mind games on them big time. Personally, I find it great for denying the old 2 CP counteroffensive, which is a massive pain in the balls for us when multi-charging. Now, on the surface it sounds great, however you do have to roll a d6 when using it, and on a 1 it fails. And let me just say, the last 2 times I played a game with Fourarmed Emperor Patrol Detachment in addition to my main force, specifically to make use of this tactic, I rolled a 1 both times. You don't get your 3 CP back. It hurts emotionally and physically. Anyway, what else do we have here? The Cult Psychic Power. Undermine. Warp Charge of 8. Not an easy cast. It halves the movement, advances, and charges of a unit until your next turn. Now, you have to be within 18 inches to cast this in the first place, so you're still going to be pretty close to whoever you're doing it to. Sure, it will make typical infantry very slow and basically bogged down, but what you should be thinking about is casting this on real fast stuff like jet bikes. Anything that goes 14 inches is going to be suffering a massive reduction down to 7 and a shitty charge roll after that. So yes, that is powerful, but often enemies will have other options available to them, or maybe they just don't care because their gun line's the real threat. One thing I would say is that it could really help slow down the advance of a big threat like Mortarion, for example. Keeping him at bay is very useful. If he gets in your lines, it's a fucking nightmare to deal with, and you're going to see him at every tournament. He's always there. Anyway, let's move on. The Cog Warlord Trait is Inscrutable Cunning. Oh, this one is shit. D3 extra command points. You'll probably roll a 1 on that. And this bit is really pants. Reroll 1 hit, wound, or saving throw for a friendly unit during the battle. No, that's just crap, that is. And, they've got a shit relic too. Sword of the Fourarmed Emperor. It replaces the Primus' Bone Sword or the Locust's Blades. It just gives you -3 AP and 4 additional attacks. I mean, the Locust Blades are already -3 AP, and they go up to flat 2 damage if he charges whilst charger intervenes. So this relic is damage 1. It actually degrades the weapon you're replacing. Now, the Primus is an absolute whiffer in combat anyway, and 4 extra 1 damage attacks will not change shit, so don't bother. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this creed is actually almost entirely crap apart from the special stratagem. But that part does have so much potential, so, it's a balancing. Do you think it's worth it? Maybe. Moving on, further down the shit list. Maybe I should have put these guys further up, I'm not sure. Rusted Claw. Let's have a gander. So, starting with the creed, which is nomadic survivalists. This one actually got tinkered with a bit in an FAQ sometime early in 9th, and I can't remember how exactly, but this is how it works now. So, it improves your basic armor save by 1, but only if the weapon hitting you is AP -1 or 0. So, that means you're on a 4-up save, or potentially 3 in cover. That ain't terrible. Again, I would have loved to have seen this on the trucks or the Ridge Runners. It would have really helped them. In a way, it's actually more beneficial than the bladed cog inform, but still, would I use it? No, I wouldn't. If my men are getting shot at, I'm already doing something wrong. I use that example many times. We're a faction that lives and dies based almost entirely on line of sight and obscuring terrain. If our infantry can be seen, they can be killed. They will get killed. Every faction in the game has got the firepower to do it and the ballistic skill to pull it off. Then there's the biker part. So when the advanced, rapid fire and pistol weapons become assault and they don't get any penalty for firing those assault weapons. So totally amazing. I mean, it would be in a world where auto pistols, shotguns and auto guns were actually even worth firing. Unless you're shooting at equally weak infantry with equally shit body armor, then it's not even worth rolling the damn dice, regardless of the creed. So let's see if there's anything else of value here. The Cult Psychic Power, Inescapable Decay. I can't say I've ever used it myself, but it's specifically for use against vehicles, giving your guys an extra -1 AP against that target. So that's mediocre at best. Loads of vehicles have inborn saves these days, so getting that extra AP is like almost not relevant. It would have been great for our autocannons on the Goliath trucks, but they don't get the Creed, so it's another waste of time. You know, bump our infantry mining lasers up to AP -4. Anything else like the rock saws, etc. are already at that level, so it's kind of pointless for them. One thing I noticed with the Pauper Princes and their last gasp power, it was the same as their Cog Warlord trait, like a doubling up. And the same can be said here with the one, what is it, the Entropic Touch. This again gives an aura that improves AP, and this one's just in the fight phase and only applies to wound rolls of 6. So forgive me for saying, but what's the fucking point? Almost all of your melee attacks are going to come from acolytes with rending claws who already go up to -4 AP on the wound rolls of 6. So all of their mining tools are going to be the high AP as well. So just fucking pointless. Anyway, the Relic. Some kind of special metaphilosophic stave, however you say it. It's for a Magus only. A close combat relic for a Magus. I don't think I even need to explain why taking a Magus for melee purposes is perhaps the worst idea anyone could have in this faction. I'm not even going to tell you what it does, because if you take it, then you're a class A tit. Going into that Creed, I almost convinced myself that they weren't that bad, but now I've reminded myself why, so let's keep going. Last up, Hive Cult. The Creed, absolute poo. Below poo, in fact. It lets you guys fall back and shoot, albeit at a -1 penalty. So I've mentioned this part before in another video. I'm 99% sure of any situation that happens. If our infantry are charged, they are torn to pieces before they get the chance to fall back. And even if they did fall back and shoot, a ballistic skill of 5+ with weapons that do fuck all in the first place, I think it's clear that it's not exactly a solid tactic. They also half the amount of models that fleed you to failed morale tests. I mean, it's nice, but it's hardly a showstopper if you've got a Patriarch around anyway, which you should do. Now, one part that does have merit is the Cog Warlord trait, which is Hive Lord, which gives a reroll 1's aura in the shooting phase. It's that only way to get that, I think, and it's stuck in the worst Cog Creed, which is lame. It also does affect trucks and ridge runners as well, so that's nice. The real problem is it's a pretty small aura, so unless your whole army is packed tight around the Warlord or chain linked around, it's going to be really tricky to milk it for all it's worth. Sure, you could combine it with a Jackal Alphas and a Primus, 9 ridge runners benefiting from all those things will do a bit of tasty work, yeah. That's pretty much the only reason I can see for taking this cult as a whole, to try and set up that situation. I'm a bit sick of talking about these crap creeds now, so I'll skip briefly over the last bits. The Psychic Power Synaptic Blast requires you to pack as many models around a big target as possible, like wrapping a tank, and then when you roll a dice for each one of the people that are wrapping that thing, then on a 6 you get a mortal wound, I think. So I can't say I've ever used it. It seems very dependent on a certain situation arising. To do it on the attack would mean waiting until after the next player's turn, so that's really going to work. So maybe it's more likely to be a sort of screen your own characters out, and then when they get charged sort of deal, then do the counter-offensive Synaptic Blast. Ugh, maybe. Lastly, the Relic is Voka's Talisman. Reroll hit rolls against characters. All of our combat troops hit exceedingly accurately in melee anyway, so that's a bit shit. And there's one last addition about causing mortals on a wound roll of 6. You know, it's nice, but it's just entirely mediocre. And I think that's everything. I mean, I think you can probably tell by the tone of my voice becoming more and more disappointed at the sheer extent of our faction's crappiness as I go through it. I mean, sure, not every choice in a codex is going to be some god tier combo, but what really bugs me and seems to bug other GSC players is the way that we have to jump through extra hoops and shit like that just to make our buffs work. You know, other factions just get things and then that, you know, it just works simply for them. I mean, maybe that's the point. If we had rules that were too easy, too powerful, then everyone would be playing Genestealer Cult. You know, I think we should be proud of the fact that the factions community has had everything the hard way for so long and very often for almost no payoff. But who knows? The light at the end of the tunnel may finally be growing closer, and hell, maybe when that codex comes out, I'll be able to look back at this video and laugh, safe in the knowledge that it's finally our time to be the absolute badasses of 9th, and everyone will hate us again. Anyway, that's the end of the video, guys. Again, tell me if I'm missing any tricks or combos. Tell me if you think I'm giving a hard time to some of the cults I talk shit about. Just expand my mind. If you guys have had luck with something that I'm not seeing, then tell me. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.